Hey, Retcon Raider here, and welcome to Werewolf the Apocalypse, Heart of the Forest. What I hear is a very short, but very well-reviewed visual novel set in the classic World of Darkness tabletop setting. And I've been kicking this one around for a while now, so I figured it was about time we got to it. Now, I will preface this by saying that, although I am a huge fan of the old World of Darkness, I am not particularly familiar with the Werewolf the Apocalypse setting. It's just not one I ever ran, and I only ever played in it, I think, once, like 20 years ago. And that was in a short-lived campaign where I ran a quirky glasswalker, I think. One who was just as ignorant of the setting as I was, and I just kind of played into that. Fortunately, it turns out that this visual novel, Heart of the Forest, is essentially intended to play as a glorified introduction to that old setting, so it's pretty much perfect for me. And for a lot of you, I would wager. The old Werewolf the Apocalypse setting is like 30 years old at this point. With that in mind, I have gone out of my way to avoid spoiling this for myself. Aside from knowing it's a relatively short game, I know almost nothing else. I did briefly dip into the tutorial, just to see how things work, and to make sure I could record it without any difficulties. But otherwise, this is going to be an almost entirely blind run as I make gut decisions and second-guess myself and just kind of hope for the best. I mean, it's just the World of Darkness. What's the worst that could possibly happen? Haha. Anyway, let's jump right in. This is a visual novel, so it is essentially just story time with Retcon, but I look forward to checking out this werewolf tale together, as we see what all the rage is about. Prologue. Premonition. This is a game about rage, and how it helps us do things that need to be done, as well as things that we later regret. Sometimes both. How do you feel about that? And this, of course, is our basic tutorial. This is what introduces the general core game concepts to us, the mechanics that make this an actual game as opposed to just a visual novel, which I do appreciate. While not quite as complex as the actual World of Darkness tabletop game, again, which I appreciate, it does draw several general concepts from it, and as we make our decisions throughout this story, it'll start filling out our sheet more and more with those various attributes and character features, helping determine where the story will go and how various events resolve. Of course, in this case, I'm not sure if it actually makes a difference which one we choose. It looks like every option gives us +1 rage. We're just setting up the basics for our character right now. But the first time I ran through this, I did say I preferred to think before acting, so let's try something different. Your rage is balanced. So, you're the critical and analytical type. That's okay, there's no right path here. Just your decisions and their consequences. Yeah, I get it. My decisions need to be fair and just. Okay, that's different. The forest. The woods are full of stars. They flicker, come closer, run away. They want me to chase them, to play hide and seek. Observe. I watch as they dance around the tree trunks, float on the gusts of wind that shiver through the branches, disappear among the leaves. There are words in their dance, but I don't understand them. Not yet. Then they bunch up and fly toward me like an arrow, rushing down. They're soon upon me. But just before the spear of light pierces my breast, they disappear, and the dark of the night returns. In the darkness, I feel the tangled roots of stories keeping the forest alive, and I hear the spirits asking me to judge the enemy. I open my eyes, and then I wake up. cold and alone. Confused, I open my eyes. The forest around me is thick, dark, and reeks of decay to such an extent that it's hard to breathe. I recognize this forest. I know this place. I've been dreaming about this forest since I was a child. The tree trunks, wrapped tightly in dark-leaved ivy, are covered in ripples of lichen, where the vines haven't taken hold. The thorny, leafless bushes at their base are overrun with nettles. The fungi radiate with a ghoulish, sickly green light. Dark, sponge-like mushrooms cling to the fallen trees. I try to breathe. I take a deep breath and suddenly realize that it's not the forest that smells so foul. It's me. I look down and see my hands covered in a dark substance. I'm naked. A sticky, glistening film of liquid is clinging to my skin. I can feel it on my face, in my hair. Blood. Oh my. I'm alert. Nature is never quiet. The leaves rustle in the wind. Small creatures scuttle in the undergrowth. There is a whisper. I don't understand what it means, but the word resonates in my head. Garou. Who said that? There's a severed head right in front of me. Some choices are hard to make, and they strain your willpower. Yeah, I think logically in a situation like this, I would not touch that, so I will save my willpower and balance out my rage, yes. I think realistically I would be very, very sick right about now. The face is contorted, the eyes bulging, the mouth open, the tongue stuck out. It's obscene. I feel bile rising in my throat and I start to retch. And then eyes open in the darkness. The enemy. I can see their silhouettes. Shades of jet black against the darkness. They reek of metal and acid and oil and money. Massive creatures, some with mandibles, some with spidery legs. Their faceted eyes burn like small industrial furnaces. I look at them and something wakes inside my chest. I'm going to go with panic, I think. I don't think I would be delighted to see this. I get up and start to run. I catch my foot on a gnarled root and fall over. The brambles reach out for me, wrapping their thorny limbs around my legs. I struggle and fall face first into the ground. Moss covers my lips and pushes itself into my open mouth, choking me. In a moment of clarity, I almost understand what the forest wants from me. And then, I wake up. And this is as far as I played in my test run. So everything from here on out is largely new. Chapter 1. Arrival. Oh, and apparently I am Maya Borodich. Duly noted. Dreams. Maya? Maya! Maya, wake up! I jerked upright. My neck was stiff, and the movement sent a sudden, sharp wave of pain through my body. I wasn't in the forest anymore. I was in a bus. The sun streaming through the windows was making it hard to see. The girl next to me was touching my shoulder, disturbed. Let's try to start this on the right foot. We can afford to burn 1 point of willpower, I think. Though obviously we don't want to completely deplete it. I don't know how frequently we'll regain these various attributes. What happened? What happened? Overcoming the urge to push her away was hard. Overcoming your rage strains your willpower. She looked at me, concerned. You had a bad dream." The memory of the wet earth clogging my mouth was still there. I fought the urge to retch. I was glad I wasn't alone. "Thank you for coming with me," I said. The girl next to me smiled. "I think we're almost there." Her name was Anya. We'd met a couple of weeks earlier on the orientation day. She was from Norway, a tall, broad-shouldered, calm person who wore her long hair in braids. Somehow I'd managed to talk her into this crazy field trip across the land of my ancestors. Oh yeah, and look at that. We have new entries on our character sheet. Maya Borodich, 24-year-old American student. We have points in inspiring, analytical, and spiritual, which I'm guessing is based on our tutorial decisions. And we now have a section for relationships as well. She seemed excited. Anya reached into her backpack and took out 2 apples. "I'm really happy we decided to come here," she said. "Yeah," I said, offering her some of my cabanosi, dried meaty sausages that were so much better than the original Polish ones back in the US. I was glad Anya had decided to come with me. I had problems keeping friends around and really needed one. "I did some searching," she said from over her phone, "and this place is amazing. The last primordial forest in Europe." This trip was my idea. Our summer language course was starting in a few weeks, and I'd managed to talk Anya into skipping the tours of concentration camps and old churches, and visiting Bialowiza. Oh gosh, I am not going to be able to pronounce that. This national park with me instead. "So far, it's beautiful," she said, her eyes smiling. "But why are we here again?" Good question. Why were we there? There being Białowieza, a village in Poland. Białowieza. Wow, I very much appreciate that they included a pronunciation guide. Białowieza. Białowieza. That's going to take some getting used to. Białowieza. There being Białowieza. There being Białowieza, a small village in northeast Poland, near the border with Belarus. It was famous for its national park, the very last European bison, and, according to a quick web search, occasional tensions between far-right troublemakers and the local Belarusian community. The most honest answer would have been, because I've been dreaming about the forest in Białowieza? Białowieza. Yes. Białowieza, since I can remember. But people didn't understand when I said things like that. I looked her in the eyes and told her as much as I could. I wanted to see the forest. I heard it was a must. That wasn't technically a lie. When I was little, my grandfather told me stories about an ancient forest full of wonders and the wolves that lived in it. It was all I got from that part of my family before my mom took me, ran away, and cut off all contact with my dad. But I remembered the stories well, and I remembered the name of the forest. Puszcza Białowiejska. This will always be our home, my grandfather used to say. I waited for her to respond. Anya fell silent for a moment. "I think it's great that you come from such a magical place," she smiled. "The last ancient forest in Europe, thousands of years old." I wasn't sure if I was fond of that magic, but it was hard to ignore. And that was precisely why I needed to do something, anything about my future. That damn forest, and my weird-ass family. I had a clear goal in mind. I wasn't there by mistake. I'd planned this trip for months with a clear goal in mind. Oh, interesting. We get to choose our primary goal. I had to learn about the truth of my roots. My grandfather's stories, the secrets, my mother running away. There was a mystery in my past. It was time I uncovered the truth about who I was. But honestly, I had no idea what to expect. Werewolves? Welcome home? Werewolves looked like an overexposed photo of a village, with the contrast turned all the way up. Heat was pouring from the cloudless sky, scorching the earth, the trees, the grass, the wooden houses, the fences. Everything looked slightly past its best. Weary, worn out. Everything except the shadows. They were sharp, as though they were freshly printed with the darkest of inks. And they moved. For a second I could have sworn they'd moved, but then I realized it was just a black cat walking down the sidewalk. When it saw me, it stopped in its tracks. Cat. I tried to pet it. Here, kitty kitty, I said, squatting and reaching toward the cat. It didn't react, instead looking me dead in the eyes, judging me. Hey, Maya, Anya said, looking at me, surprised. Didn't you say your friend would be waiting for us? But he wasn't there, and the cat was still staring at me. Let's go, Anya put on her backpack. I'm tired, and I really need to find a toilet. For a moment, I was tempted to just get out of the sun and worry about my missing friend later. And this feels like another very formative decision because we risk alienating or angering Anya. But obviously if we leave, then our other new mysterious friend might also be angered or upset or less forthcoming about things we need to know. We are also getting a lot of mileage out of balanced rage. I mean, there's only 3 possible points we could have in that right now, so I wonder if there really are that many variants of these entries. Sorry, Anya. Let's just wait a little longer, I said. I don't have his number, and we really need to meet up with him. His name was Bartek. I'd met him online while researching Werewolves. The man knew everything there was to know about the local history. I asked him to check if anyone in town remembers my grandparents. I hope he's found something. I really need to pee. Anya said it like I was a 5-year-old, and not a very bright one. Yeah, let's not max out our rage. I tried giving her my best puppy dog eyes. Let's just wait a few minutes longer, please? Pretty please? I made my best puppy dog eyes. It's important. The things we do for friends. Anya looked around to see if anyone was coming, and then made a beeline for the nearest bushes. Watch my backpack, and you owe me. So, I waited. And I waited, and the creepy cat waited with me. Bartek was 15 minutes late, flustered and apologetic. It was his dad's company, he explained while catching his breath. He'd had to help them out with some paperwork. It wasn't his fault. It's okay, I said, although part of me wanted to snap at him. But it really wasn't his fault. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and had freckles all over his face. Come on, I'll take you to your place. His accent was broad and very Eastern European, except I can't do accents, so it was American instead. Oh, interesting. Yeah, let's avoid immediate romantic entanglements, I think. Luckily, he loved talking about his home, so when I was flooding him with questions, he kindly obliged. He talked about how the village had become a tourist destination, how the logging industry had moved to a nearby town, how the trains had stopped coming, and how the local train station had turned into a hotel for wealthy foreign hunters. The dozens and dozens of bison statues scattered around the village watched us indifferently. We walked along the only street in the village, slowly making our way toward the outskirts. The trees were growing denser, their scent becoming richer and more pronounced. I took a deep breath. "So, did you manage to trace the name I gave you?" I asked. Bartek shook his head. "Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Sorry." He was avoiding my eyes. A trickle of sweat ran down his temple. He was clearly lying to me, but why? "Come on, man," I said. "You wrote to me that you'd found something." But he just clammed up. "You know what? I think you should drop it." I stopped. He was scared of something. In the world of darkness, no way. I turned to Bartek and touched his arm. "What's eating at you, man?" "You can tell us," Anya added gently. Oh, man. We're down to our last willpower point. But at the same time, I don't want to deliberately antagonize him. You know what? We'll take our chances. Hopefully we'll regain some willpower soon. I gave him time. Okay, yes. Plus spiritual, plus relationship with Bartek. But we are now impaired, which is not great. I swallowed the urge to shake him out of it and just waited. It took him a while before he finally opened up. The game tracks your decisions on how Maya approaches problems. They will accumulate and gradually reveal what kind of a person she is, deep in her heart. The story changes to reflect Maya's personality. Your willpower is dropped to 0. When you lose all your health or willpower, you become impaired. This will make physical tasks, if you have 0 health, or social and mental tasks, if you have 0 will, harder and sometimes impossible. Well, he brushed his forehead with the back of his hand. I did ask. I started with the old people here. I told them that my friend from the States was looking for her roots and wanted to know about the place her family came from. You know the drill. At first, people were very, very, receptive. I waited for the other shoe to drop. And then I mentioned your name. He shook his head. Oh, and now we can modify our rage. Though I imagine our decision here will also affect our relationship with Bartek. As far as rage goes, I think we want to drop that down. Rage can be useful, but at the same time, the higher our rage, the harder it is to control ourselves. Especially since we are completely out of will at the moment. So yeah, let's take a moment to calm down. We walked in silence for a long time. Finally, I nodded, and he continued his story. One of the old men here told me to go to hell. The other spat on the ground, and his wife crossed herself. For a moment, he looked younger and smaller. And then my own grandmother told me to stop asking. She said something else as well. I tensed up. "What?" I asked. "She told me to pray for you." Suddenly, the sweet golden afternoon wasn't so sweet and golden anymore. I laughed. "Nicely done." I punched his arm and laughed. "I almost thought you were scared of me." Bartek smiled awkwardly. "Yeah, it was just old wives' tales." "Look at me," I winked at him. "Do I look like the big bad wolf to you?" We walked in silence, but my mind was in overdrive. People didn't want to talk. And that could only mean one thing. I was on the right track. Hey, plus willpower. Nice. All things in balance. Progressed goal. Mystery. My pulse quickened and I tensed up like a hound that smelled blood. I was on the right track. Every time you learn or do something significant that brings you closer to your goal, you regain willpower. Good to know. Bed and breakfast. Białowieża had a few hotels and hostels, but the preferred form of accommodation was bed and breakfasts. That's where we stayed. I found one that was nice, clean, and that had good reviews. We had a room on the second floor and a huge window and a great view of the forest. We dropped off our stuff and soon we were ready to head out again. The day was hot and we were young and restless. "Will you show us around?" Anya smiled at Bartek. "Sure. What do you want to see?" "Before you go, check out your character sheet. Look for it on the upper right corner of the screen. You can find a load of useful info about Maya, her background, personality, goals, and so on there. You can also check out who your friends and who your enemies are." Okay, well, we do have new information here, so that's interesting. It gets regularly updated. Though, as long as we're paying attention, we'll see the updates appear, I believe. Relations, family. It's complicated. Isn't it always? Alright, well, not a lot of changes here, but that is already a fairly impressive number of variables to keep track of, though. I mean, is there really that much reactivity in this thing? I've heard it's a fairly short game, like just 3 or 4 hours long. Białowieża was a quaint tourist town. But I had other things in mind. The lay of the land. I had a clear goal in mind. My family was entangled with this town and the forest. I had to uncover my roots. Anya and Bartek went with me. Oh, cool. We get to choose where we're headed. Okay. The forest I dreamed about or the town my ancestors lived in. And logically, I feel like if we're looking for information on our family, we should go where they lived. Yes. A walk around the village. We walked through the village, bathed in the sharp rays of the summer sun. It was a lazy afternoon, disturbed only by the occasional passing car, throwing up clouds of dust that hung in the air long after the vehicle was gone. Anya was walking close to Bartek, asking him about every little detail in the village. People were relaxing or working in their yards, dogs were barking, and every cat we passed froze to look at us. People seemed quite friendly, though. Some of them smiled at us as we passed by, and every once in a while we stopped for some small talk with people who knew Bartek. The cats behaved strangely. "What's with the cats?" I asked as we passed by a tabby, who stopped in the middle of the sidewalk to meow at us. "I don't know, they're cats. Maybe they want to make up for the villagers' manners," Bartek shrugged. "You know, some people are wary of newcomers." I mean, the cats are probably reacting to us being a werewolf. And we get another chance to influence our rage, which is balanced, so I was curious why. "Why?" I asked candidly. "It's complicated." Bartek scratched his neck, embarrassed by the topic. "There's a small conflict around the forest, you know, and it's attracting some weird people. Activists, reporters, bored rich kids," he said, as though his dad didn't own multiple businesses. "People like that. And they're getting on the locals' nerves." I noticed Anya frowning. Anya looked skeptical. "I looked the conflict up online," she said, "and it didn't look so small. It looked pretty important, actually." For a moment, Bartek looked like he was lost for words. "Well, you're not one of those crazies, and you're like, almost local," he smiled. So what would you like to see in the village of your ancestors? He spread his arms as if to show me all the splendor the village had to offer. I don't know. What do you suggest? The village. Cats were watching my every move as we walked along the empty streets. And another choice as to destination. Interesting. I hope we get to visit more than one place. We already skipped out on the forest. Oh, and all of these look important. Well, we only regain willpower if we progress our actual goals, which is finding out about our family. So I think we have to start with the family graves. Mysteries of the past. And then with any luck we can maybe check out at least one of those other things later. Fingers crossed. Matters of the soul. So we have quite a few churches here, Bartek explained as we walked down the road. 2 Orthodox, 1 Catholic, and even 1 Baptist church, he said, as though that was something uncommon. It seemed like a lot of churches. Couldn't they all just use 1 building? I asked. Oh, I never thought of that. He paused. I guess they could, but, most of these churches have been here for some time, so we still use them. And we don't have a tradition of using the same building for different denominations, so it is what it is. Any Lutheran churches? Asked Anya. I don't think so. Bartek shook his head as he led us to a small wooden church, surrounded by a cemetery. Anyway, even though we have all these churches, there's only 1 cemetery. The church was Orthodox, but the graves were a mishmash of styles and faiths. Catholic, Orthodox, atheist, everyone resting together. I think we're good with our current rage, so... The place reminded me of a forest. It's like in the forest, I said, looking at the spruces growing among the graves. It's full of death. What's fallen stays where it fell. There's all kinds of trees, bushes, and animals, and life is growing out of it all. Bartek didn't look convinced. Yeah, maybe. He looked at the cemetery, and for a moment he seemed lost in thought. All of my family lies here, he said. I mean, the ones that are dead. Hey, what do you think? What do you think happens when you die? That is quite a question, Bartek. I hope it's something fair, I guess. I'd like to think that it's something fair. I like the idea of judgment, I mused. Maybe you look at your life and finally know why you were doing the things you did, and what came of it all. It would make sense. Bartek nodded. Yeah, it would. I like to believe it does. He looked over the cemetery fence. Well, anyway, this is it, the spiritual heart of Yawowieza. We can go see something else if you'd like. So that's where we stood. I wanted to go in, and he was clearly scared to let me enter the cemetery. Well, I mean, we're certainly not just walking away. And that's not even an option, so I just went in. Not so fast. I wanted to look for my family here, remember? I smiled, opening the gate. Bartek shifted uncomfortably. I don't know if that's a good idea. He was hiding something. You found it, my family's grave. Maybe. So what are we waiting for? Anya smiled at him. He mumbled something and led us through the labyrinth of graves to the far end of the cemetery. We continued. The walkways were very narrow, and the whole place seemed quite chaotic. Catholic crosses, Orthodox crosses, no crosses at all, huge statues and simple gravestones, graves you couldn't see because of all the flowers, and graves that seemed completely forgotten. And then I saw the woman, tall, broad-shouldered, and long-legged, with gray dreadlocks pinned to the crown of her head. She must have been in her late 40s or early 50s. She was marching through the walkways with fury in her eyes. Bartek quickly stepped between the graves to get out of her way. Yeah, I don't see why we would not follow his lead. I did the same. I followed his lead. I think the woman didn't even notice us, lost in thoughts and anger. Bartek looked at her with a mixture of fear and disdain. I asked Bartek about her. "Who is that?" I asked, watching the woman leave. Bartek winced. "Oh, that's Olga. She's a local activist. She left Białowieża when she was 18 or something and returned a few years back with the notion that she was going to change this place." He continued to the far corner of the cemetery. There, seemingly forgotten and covered in moss, was a lonely grave. It was damaged. The tombstone was broken, deliberately. Someone had obviously smashed it with a hammer. The name was half erased. The plaque was also damaged. Someone had tried to scratch out the name, but the letters were still visible. There was a circle around the grave. A circle of coarse salt surrounded it. "I'm sorry," Bartek sighed. "I didn't want you to see that." Salt. Interesting. That would be used to ward off evil spirits. Or contain them. "Who did this?" I asked, trying to keep my cool. I don't know." Anya squatted and looked at the plaque. "I can't read it. The letters are all wrong." She glanced at Bartek. "Is it Russian?" "Belarusian. The same letters, different language," he explained. "There were a lot of them here before the war." I looked at Bartek, hoping for some context. Bartek put his hands in his pockets. "So, you don't know anything about your dad's side of the family?" he asked me cautiously. "Whatever happened at least 70 years ago, and someone still remembers." He had a point. "I don't know them. My mom left my dad when I was just a kid, so I don't remember much," I admitted. "And she kept me away from them. She doesn't even know I'm here. I didn't tell her that I was visiting Białowieża." "Maybe he was abusive?" said Anya carefully. "Perhaps she wanted to protect you." "Yeah, I guess." I looked at the grave. My family's name looked strange, written in the unfamiliar Belarusian letters. As we were leaving, I was thinking. I was on to something. Hey, willpower. Nice. All things in balance. There was something unnatural about my family, and me coming to Białowieża had stirred some old demons. I just had to find out what my ancestors were doing here, who they were. With that thought, I left the cemetery. And hey, we're back on the Białowieża village map. So we do get to visit at least one of these other two locations. Nice. This is fascinating. I mean, obviously it's a bit of a slow start, which makes sense given the nature of the game. This is an introduction to the setting, and they're not just going to throw us in head first. Though we did have that rather ominous dream during the prologue, so I'd wager that's a hint at things to come. Not to mention, of course, Maya's apparent difficulty in really controlling herself. I'm trying to give her some semblance of self-control, especially when it comes to dealing with other people, but you can definitely see the game kind of steering her back towards rage whenever possible. And some people, I imagine, would just indulge themselves in that, burn their bridges, and embrace the chaos. I mean, inevitably, we will get to a point where we just don't happen to have willpower when we need it, and we will have to make some unfortunate decisions, I'm sure. Anyway, my throat's getting a bit gunked up, and we are about 40 minutes in anyway, so I feel like this is a good breaking point. We'll hit the pause button for now. I will go grab a drink and a breather, but we'll pick this up shortly. We're barely into this, and I am already enthralled. I am very curious to see how this all plays out. See you then. Oh, and remember, although I do love playing Werewolf the Apocalypse, Heart of the Forest, you can find out more about the game by visiting the official website, the official social media feeds, or the official store pages. And if you'd like to help support the channel, feel free to push the buttons that do the things, or maybe even check out the Patreon. Links are in the description.